good to have you with us. Our top story tonight, the Secretary-General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, is calling for an immediate end to the fighting in Ethiopia's Tigray region. Today, he said, the country is being torn apart by war.
The situation in Ethiopia is spiraling out of control. Violence and destruction have reached alarming levels. The social fabric is being ripped apart. Hostilities in the Tigray region of Ethiopia must end now, including the immediate withdrawal and disengagement of Eritrean armed forces from Ethiopia.
Well, those comments by Antonio Guterres come as Ethiopian government forces do appear to be making progress on the ground. Sources say that as of this Monday, they're now in control of the city of Shire, a strategic hub in the north of Tigray. Now, all the while, the situation for civilians remains dire. More than 2 million people have been driven from their homes, and now there is a threat of famine as well. Earlier today, I spoke to William Davidson. He's a senior analyst at International Crisis Group, and I started by asking him what hope there was for a ceasefire soon in the region.
The Tigray regional government, just in yesterday, I think, or perhaps the day before, they sort of responded to the African Union request for a cessation of hostilities and said that they wanted that too and would abide by it. The issue is that, as you noted, the Eritrean and the Ethiopian federal forces have made some significant gains over the last few days. It appears that the Tigray's defences are overstretched. And today we heard from the federal government in Ethiopia, they said they want to control all federal institutions inside Tigray, which essentially means continuing their military operations and is a de facto rejection of calls for an immediate cessation of hostilities from the UN Secretary-General, the African Union and others.
Presumably then it will be difficult to get both sides to the negotiating table while this fighting is still going on.
Yes, that's right. I think that we've had attempts at a peace process this year. We've seen some improvements in the situation, but essentially a failure eventually to get any serious negotiations underway, and that was followed by the resumption of the conflict in August. We've now had 7 weeks of fighting, and as I said, at the moment it looks like the leadership in Ethiopia and in Eritrea is intent upon a military solution to this conflict rather than a negotiated one, and we expect to see continued fierce resistance from Tigray's leadership. They now have a large army under their command, so despite the losses we've seen, we would expect to see some form of sustained and fierce continued resistance.
Now, let's talk about the people living in this region, William, the Tigray region. There are about 6 million people there, and they're under effective blockade, aren't they? They face food shortages, medicine shortages, as well as real challenges communicating with the outside world. Do we actually know what life is like for civilians who are effectively trapped in Tigray?
Obviously, only bits and pieces of information are coming out. It is, as you describe it, this is a region that's almost completely isolated. It's been under this blockade for most of the past 2 years. Now we see a massive risk of serious violence against civilians by the Ethiopian Eritrean forces, something we've seen in previous phases of the conflict. And that is because as they attempt to try and pacify and control the region in the face of this Tigrayan resistance, we're likely to see action taken against the civilian population to try and break the back of the Tigrayan resistance. So it is likely that we will see more atrocities to come against Tigray's long-suffering civilian population.
Are humanitarian groups able to access those civilians on the ground?
There is some humanitarian actors and activity inside Tigray, but there has been almost no supplies and humanitarian convoys going into Tigray since the resumption of the war in late August. There are huge shortages of fuel, trucks, obviously massive security constraints in terms of what humanitarians can do inside Tigray. So really this conflict has exacerbated an already devastating, the resumption of the conflict has exacerbated a very serious situation. And now, like I say, we're likely to see direct attacks against civilians as a result of what seems to be a new phase in the war that we're about to enter.
It's William Davison talking to me a little earlier.